The next 2 days passed without event. On Wednesday night, the Sioux City Strangler stayed in after picking up a pizza and a 6-pack of Budweiser. He fell asleep watching some black and white movie that he never got the name of. The following days were full of meetings with different doctors scattered across the city and surrounding neighborhoods. None were as interesting as Dr. Ted Anderson, but unlike Anderson, they actually had practices with patients in them. Each night he returned to his room at the Hollywood Hacienda to flip on the TV and wait patiently. He stocked up on cigarettes each afternoon and smoked like a chimney. A nightly call to Maria helped. To her, he must have seemed lonely, which wasn't really the whole truth. Sure, he missed Maria, but he had his mind on the housekeeper and was firmly focused on Friday at 5 p.m. On Friday morning, the Sioux City Strangler got up bright and early, unable to sleep any longer. He could feel the electricity in the air, the charge coursing through his veins. He so rarely knew who he was hunting ahead of time that this experience gave him a unique thrill. He went through his morning routine, stepping into the hot shower just after 7 a.m. He got out and drank a cup of cold coffee he'd obtained the afternoon before, a routine that he'd adopted without really thinking about it. Yes, hot coffee was better, but having a full cup of cold coffee from the night before meant you didn't have to leave your room and be seen on the big day. The Sioux City Strangler wiped the fog from the medicine cabinet mirror with the palm of his hand. He slathered shaving cream on his face and took his time with a fresh blade. He wiped the cream off with the white towel wrapped around his waist and stared into the mirror. After a few seconds, he contorted his face into a sick-looking smile. Well, boys and girls, today is the day. What do we have on the calendar? Well, boys and girls, it's Friday, and that means it's time for some fun. It's going to be a hot one out there, that's for sure, so I guess you could say it's time for some fun in the sun. The Sioux City Strangler paused, took a long beat, and then let out a fake laugh. Ah, ha, ha, ha! That's right, Steve, you could say that. He was addressing an imaginary anchor named Steve, the guy on the sports desk. The real magic isn't going to be happening outside, though. No, we're not in for any spectacular sunsets or rainbows or puppy parades. Oh, no. There's no eclipse for you to look out for and no aurora borealis to fix your gaze upon. Oh, no, boys and girls. Today is all about a special private event that only a select few will attend. And believe it or not, boys and girls, it's going to be held right here at the Hollywood Hacienda Motel. Can you believe that? This fucking shithole is going to be the site of something big. Don't worry, though, if you didn't get your invite in the mail. You'll be able to read about this in the paper before you know it. It's surely going to get some coverage, and if you're lucky, you might even get a few pictures right here on your television screen. Now, wouldn't that be something, boys and girls? The Sioux City Strangler dropped his smile and rinsed his face with cold water. It was 7:20 and he had a meeting at 8. He finished his coffee, got dressed, and headed out the door, stopping to urinate. As he passed the mirror, he looked into it one more time. What he saw was a well-dressed man, clean-shaven, hair-combed, and reasonably handsome. He straightened his collar and shot his cuffs with a cigarette between his teeth. He smiled, but it wasn't for the camera or the imaginary TV audience. This time, it was just for him. He couldn't remember the last time he was this happy. This is the story of the Sioux City Strangler, a man who terrorized the great state of Iowa for nearly 10 years before making his way to California for a little fun in the sun and a fresh crop of citizens to terrorize. I'm your host, Mary Buckley, and you're listening to Sioux City Strangler, the podcast. The day was a busy one for the Sioux City Strangler as he met with doctors all over town, even leaving the city limits to meet with the last two. His only break was a 30-minute stop at White Castle for a stack of burgers and a couple of Cokes. He made sure to ask for one more refill on his way out the door, much to the chagrin of the overworked teenager behind the counter. At 4:19, the Sioux City Strangler made it back to the motel, parking his vehicle near the check-in office. To his surprise, the office was closed. He tried the door, but it was locked. The office was dark inside, and it was clear that nobody was home. For the next 20 minutes, the Sioux City Strangler sat on the bed, alternating between watching TV and running lines about his dead mother. He didn't think he'd end up using them, but it never hurt to have another card to play. He frequently looked over at the White Castle cup full of warm Coca-Cola just to make sure it was still there. At 4:45, the Sioux City Strangler lit a cigarette and walked over to the door to check that the chain guard was still in place. It was, and he smiled, knowing that the maid would have to knock to be let in. He paced the room, unable to sit still, feeling like a boy on Christmas waiting to play with that big fire truck under the tree. The clock read 5 p.m., then 5:02, then 5:04. The Sioux City Strangler smoked furiously, now a little agitated. He tried to push the idea that she might have forgotten out of his head by turning up the TV. He changed the channel, then changed it back, unable to find anything interesting enough to distract him. Finally, at 5:17, the knock came, and the Sioux City Strangler's face lit up. There was a fire truck under the tree after all, and it was finally time to unwrap it. Loudly, he announced that he'd be right there, making sure the housekeeper could hear him. He grabbed the White Castle cup, which was almost overflowing from the melted ice, and walked into the bathroom with it. He sat it on the edge of the small vanity and gently pushed, watching it fall to the floor. The liquid spread out quickly, small drops splashed on the nearby walls and toilet fixture. The Sioux City Strangler looked in the mirror and spoke quietly. "It's showtime, boys and girls." We'll be right back after this message.
The world seems like it's gone sideways, right? When you're left to fend for yourself, you need gear that's going to keep you and your family safe. That's where Whitewood Tactical Clothing and Hunting Apparel comes in. With true armed forces level gear available on our site and in store, we can help you find everything from tactical pants to military boots and flight suits. We've even got women's and kids' sizes so you can find the right stuff for the whole family. Don't forget to check out our selection of hunting gear while you're with us. We've got ultra-durable gear for every hunter, whether you're working with a modern rifle or a basic buck knife. Visit Whitewood Tactical Clothing and Hunting Apparel online today to take your readiness to the next level.
The Sioux City Strangler put on a worried look and opened the door to greet the housekeeper. She was standing behind her pushcart with no particular expression on her face. She was just waiting to come in, do her job, and make a few bucks so she could go home. "Oh, hello," he said with a little tension in his voice. "I'm sorry it took me so long to get to the door. I spilled a Coke and I was just starting to clean it up, but I didn't have time to get it all." The housekeeper smiled and nodded wordlessly. A spilled soda pop was among the least disgusting messes she'd taken on that day. The Sioux City Strangler held the door open and tried to stand out of the way. He waved toward the bed, a friendly gesture that meant come on in. The housekeeper pushed her heavy cart through the door and started stripping the bed. She didn't even bother to look for the spill. "I'll be back," said the Sioux City Strangler, smiling at the housekeeper, an unlit cigarette in his hand. The housekeeper nodded again with a slight smile on her face. She'd prefer not to be watched as she cleaned anyway. Leaving the door cracked, he walked to his car near the check-in office. He got in and drove slowly, backing into the parking spot right in front of his room. He cut the engine and smoked with the windows up. As he finished the cigarette, he opened the glove box and reached in, pulling out his favorite pair of black leather gloves. He put them on, got out of the vehicle, and quickly shoved his hands in his pockets. He let the filter fall from his lips and hit the ground, crushing it with the heel of his shoe. The Sioux City Strangler approached his room and tapped on the door with his toe, simulating a knock. He entered the room and the housekeeper was on the other side vacuuming the dirty carpet. Did you get to the spill in the bathroom yet? She seemed a bit startled since she wasn't able to hear his knock over the roar of her machine. She shook her head no and stopped vacuuming. She usually did the bathroom last, but it was clear to her that he wanted the bathroom clean now. Here, let me show you where it is. The Sioux City Strangler walked behind her and took his hands out of his pockets. The spill was large and clearly visible. In fact, the housekeeper had already seen it as she was vacuuming. She just wasn't in any hurry to clean it up. Still, she let him go along behind her to point it out. The housekeeper picked up a towel on the floor partially covered in cola and began to wipe up the rest of the spill. As she straightened up to take the wet towel back to her cart, the Sioux City Strangler pounced. In a flash, he was on her, pushing her down from behind before she could turn around to face him. Her head hit the wall, and the impact of the Sioux City Strangler's 200-pound frame coming down on top of her knocked the air right out of her body. Every bit as strong as he looked, the Sioux City Strangler flipped her over and had his hands around her throat before she had a chance to make any sort of significant sound. Even if somebody was standing right outside the door, the only noise they would have heard was the sound of her head against the wall. After checking her body for a pulse several times, the Sioux City Strangler lit a cigarette. He knew he'd have to spring into cleanup mode momentarily, but he had time for a 2-minute victory lap. He stood over her body and smiled, turning to the mirror once again. Tom, we're here at the Hollywood Hacienda, and you'll never believe the brutal violence that has rocked our sleepy little burg today. Some kind of goddamn monster, a devil worshiper, a heartless demon, a vampire, an ice-cold animal with no remorse is running free today, and this scene is living, proof. I don't even know if I can speak to the horrors that I've witnessed here at the Hollywood Hacienda, but I will try for you, dear resident, valuable viewer, seeker of local color and information and entertainment. Today, I was called to the scene to find the body of a woman, still unidentified but wearing a maid's attire, dead on the floor of a filthy bathroom. There are no signs of struggle outside of what appears to be a spilled Coca-Cola and the empty White Castle cup that likely used to contain said Coca-Cola, though police are still investigating the cup, staking out each White Castle in the area around the clock, stuffing burgers into their gaping fat faces at will. It appears that the housekeeper, again we think it was a housekeeper based on her clothing, was assaulted and killed here in this very room. Now again, this is unconfirmed, but there are some marks around the dead woman's neck, so police strongly believe this is a case of foul play. However, it should be noted that it is possible that the woman slipped and hit her head, as there is a bit of blood on the wall and a minor abrasion on the housekeeper's forehead. As usual, I'll be back with reports every 7 minutes to give you updates on this heinous crime. Stand by your TV sets to learn more. The Sioux City Strangler turned his torso to the shower fast, looking away from the mirror. He whipped back around a new man, a new persona present in the reflection. I hope you enjoyed the show, boys and girls. I truly do. Was it everything you hoped it would be? Sioux City Strangler, the podcast, will be right back after this message from the Class Action Compliance Consumer Advocacy Group.
Class action settlements are supposed to hold big companies and multinational corporations accountable. But if you've been part of a class action settlement award in the last 20 years, you know that getting the compensation you're entitled to isn't automatic. The Class Action Compliance Consumer Advocacy Group is here to be your partner. Whether you're owed a few $100s or a few thousand, we make it our mission to provide you with a speedy payout, whether your class action was settled last decade or last week. Depending on your particular case, we may even be able to offer you a payout before your settlement amount has been decided and your case completed. To see if you qualify, visit us online at cacadvocacy.com and navigate to our pre-settlement page. Our virtual assistant is available 24/7 to answer any questions you may have when filling out our 10-minute questionnaire. Hold corporations accountable and get your settlement now by contacting the Class Action Compliance Consumer Advocacy Group today. Class Action Compliance Consumer Advocacy Group is not licensed to offer legal advice, legal service, or collect outstanding debts of any kind in Alaska, California, Delaware, Florida, Puerto Rico, or the U.S. Virgin Islands.
At 7:30 p.m., the Sioux City Strangler was stretched out on the bed, having just taken down half a pizza he'd had delivered to his room. He finished his second Coke and thought about getting up for another slice. Instead, he reached for his cigarettes on the nightstand and lit one. The curtains were drawn tight in his room, but he could see the light fading around the edges of the window. It would only be a few more hours until he could get out of town. In his mind, he ran through his checklist. He'd need to pack his clothes and personal belongings, making sure he didn't leave anything behind. He'd need to leave his room key in the drop box. Maybe he'd even call Maria to let her know he would be on his way before too long. All of that was easy. Getting the dead housekeeper into his car was going to be the hard part. He tried to think of where to leave the woman, even consulting a map. He knew he couldn't go back to where he'd put Cinnamon. The cops would be watching, probably, waiting for some crazed lunatic to come back to relive the glory of their kill. That, or they'd be looking for some drifter to pin the murder on so they could close the case and look like heroes. The Sioux City Strangler put it out of his mind, knowing that he wouldn't be able to move her till at least midnight anyway. He smoked as the light faded outside, an eerie orange glow seeping into his room. The television played another Western, but tonight he wasn't very interested in gun-toting cowboys and brothel-based damsels in distress. By 9 p.m., he was asleep, having finished off all but one slice of the pizza, chasing it with another can of Coke and a few more cigarettes. He'd set the alarm clock in his room for 11, giving himself plenty of time to pack and load up the car. At 11, he awoke to the buzzing of the alarm, feeling groggy and sleep-deprived. He lit a cigarette and finished the last third of the now-warm Coke on his bedside table. The television was playing the news, letting all the area residents know about an upcoming cookie-eating contest the next day. Too bad he couldn't stick around for that, he thought. Stripping off his clothes, he walked to the bathroom and turned the shower on hot. He looked in the mirror and thought of giving the news viewers an update. He did promise them a report every 7 minutes after all, but he was just too tired. He stepped over the housekeeper's body and ducked into the shower to wash off instead. By 11:30, the Sioux City Strangler was dressed in a black button-down and a pair of dark blue suit pants. It wasn't an outfit he'd wear to meet with one of his doctor clients, but it was professional enough that if he got pulled over by the cops, he'd probably look like a regular working guy. It was also dark enough that you might miss him if, for example, you drove by him unloading a body in a darkened field at 3 a.m. The Sioux City Strangler tied his shoes and lit a cigarette. He opened the door and stepped out onto the walkway to see just what was going on around the motel. Just like he expected, the lot was barely a quarter full. This wasn't the kind of place that weekend travelers wanted to stay in, even if they were in town for a cookie-eating contest. Just before 12, the Sioux City Strangler stepped out of his room again and placed his packed suitcase into the back seat of his Pontiac. He went back inside and scanned the room, checking under the bed and inspecting every inch of the closet down on his knees. In the back corner, he found a few stray hairs that looked like Cinnamon's. He picked them up and walked outside again, opening his hand and letting the gentle summer breeze take them away. The Sioux City Strangler shut the door tight and locked it behind him. It was go time, and he walked into the bathroom to figure out how he was going to handle this. He looked down at the housekeeper and just for a moment considered leaving her right there for the motel manager to find. Standing over her body, he turned to face the mirror after slapping himself in the face 3 times in an attempt to wake the fuck up, to snap out of whatever complacent daze he'd found himself in. Today, a man was arrested in the housekeeper case we've been reporting on. The suspect is a white male, a Vietnam veteran who worked in the medical business. Sleep-deprived and simply stupid, the man, name still unknown, confessed to multiple murders of women throughout the Midwest. When asked why he'd simply left the body at the scene, the moronic man stated that he simply did not know, and that perhaps it was because he was just tired. Well, that's good news for us, isn't it, citizens? He'll have plenty of time to rest while he rots for the rest of his life in a prison cell somewhere. The Sioux City Strangler slapped himself again, harder than before. With renewed vigor, he grabbed the housekeeper's body by the ankles and dragged her out into the room. Quickly, now a man of action, suddenly whipped into a frenzy by the fear of a life behind bars, he pulled the white flat sheet from the bed and covered her body. He dragged her again, this time by the arms, to a spot by the door under the window. He grabbed his keys from the small cafe table and approached his vehicle. He popped the trunk and left it open, his head on a swivel, taking in every detail of the parking lot, scanning windows and checking for passing cop cars. In what seemed like a single motion, the Sioux City Strangler walked back into the room, scooped up the sheet and the body beneath it, and walked outside. He kept his arms low, cradling her body against his thighs, knowing that the car and the open trunk would obscure his movements and, more importantly, what he was moving, from view. He shut the trunk firmly, being careful not to slam it down and draw attention his way. Back in his room, the Sioux City Strangler locked the door and turned off the lights. He pulled a chair from the cafe table over to the window and sat, peeking out into the parking lot for any commotion. He did that for the next 2 hours, switching back and forth from looking out the window to staring at the television, now the only source of light in his room. He smoked almost continuously, going through most of a fresh pack by 2 a.m. At 2:05, the Sioux City Strangler turned off the TV and checked the window one more time. The motel was silent, and there wasn't even a single light visible. He made his move right then and left his room, locking the door behind him. Behind the wheel of his Pontiac, the Sioux City Strangler felt like he was home free, if just for a moment. He returned his room key, stopping his car in front of the check-in office, letting the motor run as he slipped it through the drop box. As he pulled out onto the street, the Sioux City Strangler lit a cigarette. All of a sudden, he knew exactly where he was going to take the housekeeper. He turned on the radio and cranked the rock station. Taken Care of Business by Bachman Turner Overdrive spilled out of the speakers. The Sioux City Strangler smiled, took a drag off his cigarette, and stepped on the gas. If all went according to plan, he'd be in bed next to Maria before sunrise. Sioux City Strangler, the podcast, is a Past Due production and was recorded in sunny Los Angeles, California at Past Due Studios. This episode was written by Christopher Chase Godwin. Theme music was written and performed by Michael Wegner. Additional music by Michael Wegner and Christopher Chase Godwin. Storyblocks and Epidemic Sound also provided music for this episode. Dialogue editing services were provided by Janet Berry. Additional editing by Karl Weiss at Past Due Studios. Mixing by Tommy Singh. Audio mastering provided by Renee Rojas. Katrina Moan is the executive producer. Learn more of the Sioux City Strangler story by visiting SiouxCityStrangler.com today. Don't forget to follow Sioux City Strangler on Instagram for bonus content you won't find anywhere else. You can also shop Sioux City Strangler merchandise online to let everyone know you're a Strangler superfan. We've got posters, coffee mugs, and more available online now. As always, we need to thank our sponsors for their generous support. Visit SiouxCityStrangler.com/sponsors to find all of our unique promo codes in one place. Subscribe to Sioux City Strangler, the podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major platforms today to get new episodes as soon as they're available. We'll see you back here for the next episode.